A millionaire is racing through life until a child brings his destiny to a screeching halt. With a note in her hand, the little girl doesn't want attention. She wants a memory. She wants an answer. The address on the note haunts him, as does the handwriting of someone he pretended to forget. If this beautiful story of love and overcoming the odds has you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. The sharp squeal of the brakes echoed through the New York morning as Richard Harrison slammed his foot on the pedal of the black Mercedes. His heart hammered against his ribs as his hands gripped the leather steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. For one terrifying moment, he thought he had hit someone pulling out of the shops at Hudson Yards, but there had been no impact. Just a small, grimy hand that had touched the car's flawless window, leaving a damp smudge that contrasted with the gleam of the recently waxed finish. Richard took a deep breath, feeling a cold sweat trickle down his forehead as he peered through the windshield. A thin girl, no older than 7, stood beside the vehicle. Worn, faded clothes hung loosely on her frail frame, and her bare feet were a stark contrast to the clean asphalt of the mall's parking garage. Tangled, uncared-for brown hair framed a small face dominated by 2 dark eyes, far too large for her childish features. Richard lowered the window just a few inches, enough for his voice to escape the climate-controlled interior. The smell of new leather and imported cologne mingled with the hot city, air creating an almost tangible barrier between 2 worlds. "What do you want?" The question came out harsher than he intended, laced with the stress of his schedule and the recent scare. The girl didn't answer right away. Instead, she held up a small hand clutching a yellowed, crumpled piece of paper. Folded and refolded so many times, the creases looked like scars. The gesture was careful, almost reverent, as if that single sheet was the most precious object in the world. "Please, sir, can you read this for me?" Her voice was a whisper, but there was a quiet determination in it that made Richard hesitate before replying. He glanced at the diamond-studded watch on his wrist. In 20 minutes, he was due at a meeting with the executives from Summit Development Group to discuss a $50 million investment. After that, lunch with the Commissioner of Urban Development, followed by a presentation for Japanese investors. His schedule was meticulously planned, every minute calculated to maximize results. "I don't have time for this. Go find your family." Richard was already raising the window when the girl spoke again. "I can't read, and I don't have a family." The words were delivered, without drama, as if they were simply facts she had long since accepted. Something in the simplicity of that statement made Richard pause. He looked more closely at the child through the half-open window. There were no tears in her eyes, none of the pleading tone he expected to hear, just the quiet certainty of someone who knew no other reality. "Please," the girl insisted, holding the paper out toward the window. "I found this in my mom's things. I think it might be about me." Richard sighed, the weight of his impatience mixing with something he couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe just the desire to end this strange situation as quickly as possible. He lowered the window a little more and reached out, taking the paper carefully to avoid touching the child's dirty fingers. The sheet was soft from age and constant handling. He unfolded it slowly, revealing a shaky, uneven script written in a blue pen that had faded in places. The edges were yellowed, and there were small stains that could have been dried tears or just water. Richard began to read silently, but the first few words made his stomach clench. "My dearest daughter." The text continued in crooked lines, full of crossed-out and corrected words. "If you're reading this, it means you've grown up enough to understand, or some kind soul is reading it to you, just like I always dreamed would happen." Richard's hands trembled slightly as he read on. The letter spoke of a desperate mother, forced to leave her young daughter behind while she fought an illness she couldn't afford to treat. It wasn't abandonment, but an absolute lack of options in a world that offered no alternatives for the poor. "I never left you because I didn't love you, my little one. I left because I loved you too much to let you watch me waste away. In the attic of our old house at 247 Acacia Avenue in Queens, there's a blue box hidden behind the beams. Inside is everything I saved of yours, all the proof that you were wanted from the very first day." Richard felt a lump form in his throat as he reached the end of the letter. The handwriting grew shakier, the words more spaced out, as if each letter was a monumental effort. Forgive me for not being strong enough to stay. Forgive me for not being able to give you the world you deserved. But know that every day away from you was an agony I chose to bear so that you could have a chance at happiness. And then, at the bottom of the yellowed page, a signature that made the blood in Richard's veins run cold. With all my eternal love, Carmen Diaz. Richard blinked several times, rereading the name he had just discovered. Carmen Diaz. The name echoed in his mind, like a distant memory he had buried long ago. His hands began to sweat as he held the paper, and for a moment he completely forgot about the girl waiting outside his car. He took a deep breath, trying to control the turmoil rising in his chest. He folded the letter quickly, almost brutally, and handed it back through the window without looking directly at the child. It's nothing important. The lie came naturally, practiced through years of negotiations where hiding the truth was a necessary strategy. Just some personal notes. Nothing you need to know. The girl took the paper with the same reverent care as before, but Richard saw the change in her eyes. There was a sadness there that went beyond disappointment, a resignation of someone used to not getting answers. Thanks anyway, she said softly, clutching the letter to her chest. Richard raised the window without another word and hit the accelerator. The Mercedes pulled silently out of the parking garage, leaving behind the girl standing on the curb, a small, solitary figure against the backdrop of the city's morning rush. But as he drove through the congested avenues of Manhattan, Richard couldn't get the image of the child, holding that letter like it was her only treasure out of his mind, nor the name he had read, which now hammered at his thoughts with the force of a memory that refused to stay buried. The conference room on the 32nd floor of the office tower had a panoramic view of the New York skyline, but Richard couldn't focus on the urban landscape stretching beyond the glass. Seated at the head of the polished mahogany table, he listened to the numbers being presented by the Summit Development Group executives without really processing the information. Mr. Harrison, the CFO's voice brought him back to the present. Would you like to review the third quarter projections? Richard blinked, realizing he had missed at least 10 minutes of the presentation. The four men in suits around the table watched him with respectful expectation, awaiting his analysis of an investment that could yield millions. My apologies. Continue. He adjusted his Italian tie and tried to force himself to concentrate, but the image of the girl holding the letter kept flashing in his mind like a warning light that refused to go out. Carmen Diaz. The name echoed in his thoughts with a disturbing insistence. He had known a Carmen more than 15 years ago when he was just a young developer trying to expand his real estate business. She worked as a cleaner in the first building he had bought to renovate, an old property in the heart of the city. He remembered her vaguely, a young woman, maybe 25, always polite and hard-working. Dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, a blue uniform that was always immaculate despite being visibly old. She cleaned the offices in the dead of night, arriving after everyone else had gone home. The profit margins are exactly as projected, the executive continued, pointing to colorful graphs dancing on the screen. With the proposed investment, we can expand into 3 more states by next year. Richard nodded mechanically, but his mind drifted to those nights when he worked late in the still under-renovation office. Carmen would always knock before entering, politely asking for permission. Sometimes they exchanged a few words about work or the weather, brief, cordial conversations he had completely forgotten until that morning. Then one day, she just stopped showing up. He had asked the cleaning supervisor, who simply said she had quit without notice. Richard hadn't thought much of it at the time. Employees came and went, especially in outsourced services. Mr. Harrison, the insistent voice brought him back to the present again. We need your approval to move forward with the project. Richard looked at the papers spread before him, columns of numbers he would normally analyze with surgical precision. But today the figures seemed blurry, meaningless in the face of the memory of that yellowed letter, and the little girl's soft voice asking for someone to read to her. I'll review the documents and get back to you by tomorrow, he said finally, pushing the papers back to the center of the table. "Cancel my afternoon appointments." The silence in the room was almost palpable. In his 15-year career, Richard Harrison had never postponed a business decision, let alone cancelled important meetings without an explanation. Meanwhile, 9 miles away, the girl walked slowly through the downtown streets, her bare feet treading carefully where the asphalt was less hot. She carried a torn plastic bag with a few items of clothing and the folded letter in the pocket of her worn-out pants. Her name was Luna, though few people knew it. To most of the shopkeepers and passers-by who saw her daily, she was just another street kid, as invisible as so many others. She had learned to survive by collecting cans, helping elderly women with heavy groceries, or simply waiting for someone to offer a few coins. The letter had been a chance find in a bag of donations a kind woman had given her the week before. Among old clothes and some used shoes, the yellowed paper had caught her eye because of how carefully it was folded, as if it were something important. Luna couldn't read, but she recognized a few stray words she had learned from looking at street signs and store posters. She could make out daughter and love, words that sparked a hope in her she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe, she thought, this letter could tell the story she had always wanted to know about herself. She stopped in a small, shady park, sitting on a worn wooden bench. She took the letter from her pocket and looked at it again, trying to decipher the scribbles that were nothing more than meaningless lines to her. But there was something in the shaky handwriting that conveyed affection, as if each letter had been written with love. A group of children played near a fountain, supervised by attentive mothers who chatted animatedly. Luna watched the scene with a mixture of curiosity and melancholy. She couldn't remember ever playing like that, protected and cared for. Her earliest memories were of cold, hunger and hurried people who passed by her as if she were part of the urban landscape. Back in his office, Richard dismissed his secretary early and stayed alone in the room overlooking the city. He opened a solid wood cabinet where he kept a bottle of 20-year-old single malt scotch and poured a generous amount into a crystal glass. The drink burned his throat, but couldn't burn away the questions multiplying in his mind. What if the Carmen from the letter was the same one he had known? What if the girl was really her daughter? Even more disturbing, what if Carmen had tried to find him back then, when she was sick and needed help? Richard remembered moving several times as his business expanded. Maybe Carmen had tried to locate him and failed. The possibility made him feel a strange weight in his chest, a responsibility he wasn't sure he wanted to accept. He picked up the phone and dialed the human resources department of the company that managed the cleaning services for his old building. After a few transfers and vague explanations about a background check, he managed to speak with an employee who had been working there since that time. "Carmen Diaz? Yeah, I remember her," said the woman on the other end of the line. "She was a good kid, a hard worker, left without notice, but we heard later she was sick. Cancer, I think. It was really sad." The whiskey glass slipped from Richard's hand, shattering on the marble floor. The golden liquid spread among the shards, reflecting the office lights like little pools of materialized guilt. "Sir, are you still there?" the employee asked. Yes, I'm here. Thank you for the information." Richard hung up the phone with trembling hands. The confirmation of what he already suspected hit him like a physical blow. Carmen was dead, probably for years, and had left behind a daughter who was now living on the streets, asking strangers to read a letter that could change her life. Richard looked out the window at the city stretching below, millions of lives intertwined in a complex tapestry of destinies that crossed and diverged constantly. Somewhere down there, a girl was walking with a letter in her pocket, unaware that she held the key to understanding her own story. In that moment, Richard made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He grabbed his car keys and left the office, leaving behind the broken glass and his carefully planned schedule. He had a little girl to find. The black Mercedes cut through the streets of New York like a silent predator searching for its prey. Richard drove without a specific destination, just following an intuition that led him through neighborhoods where wealth gradually gave way to survival. His hands sweated on the steering wheel as he scanned every sidewalk, every park, every corner where a barefoot girl might be walking. 3 hours later, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, he found her. Luna was sitting on the steps of an old church downtown, the letter still clutched to her chest. Her dark eyes watched the street traffic with an attention that seemed far too old for her age. When she saw the car approach, she didn't run or hide. She just sat there as if she had been waiting. Richard parked and got out of the car slowly, feeling the weight of each step that brought him closer to the girl. The difference between them was stark, him in his $3,000 suit and Italian shoes, her in her tattered clothes and feet dusty from walking the city's rough streets. "You came back," Luna said when he got closer, her voice holding more statement than surprise. "Yes." Richard stopped a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, unsure how to begin the conversation that would change both their lives. "About the letter, I lied. To you." Luna tilted her head, waiting. "I did read what it said, and it is important. Very important." Richard's throat felt dry. "Your mother, Carmen, she wrote you a love letter, a letter explaining why she had to leave." The girl's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. She just held the letter tighter, as if afraid someone might take it from her. "She didn't abandon you because she didn't love you," Richard continued, each word coming with difficulty. "She was sick, and she couldn't take care of you the way you deserved. In the letter, she talks about a box hidden in a house, a box with your things." "My mom," Luna murmured, her voice barely audible. "I always knew she existed, but I never knew why she left. People said I was abandoned, that nobody wanted me." Richard felt a knot in his stomach. He himself had contributed to that pain just hours earlier, lying about the letter's contents out of pure cowardice. "Do you want to see the house?" he asked, surprising himself with the offer. "I can take you there." Luna looked at him with a mix of suspicion and hope. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." The question echoed in Richard's mind. Why was he doing this? Out of guilt, curiosity, or something deeper he couldn't name? "Because everyone deserves to know their own story," he finally answered, and realized he was being sincere. The drive to Acacia Avenue was silent. Luna curled up on the Mercedes's leather seat, touching everything with reverence, as if she were in a museum. The contrast between the car's luxury and the girl's simplicity created an almost surreal atmosphere. Richard watched in the rearview mirror as she held the letter, now unfolded. Even though she couldn't read the words, there was something touching in the way her fingers traced the lines of handwriting, as if she could absorb her mother's love through touch. "How did you know where to find me?" Luna asked suddenly. "I didn't. I just kept looking until I found you." "No one's ever looked for me before." The simplicity of the statement hit Richard like a punch. He imagined how many times this girl had been ignored, how many people had walked past her without seeing her. He himself had done it just hours before. Acacia Avenue was in a neighborhood that had once been middle class, but now showed clear signs of neglect. Houses with peeling paint, overgrown yards, windows protected by rusty bars. The number 247 stood out for being clearly uninhabited for years. The house was small and simple, with exposed brick walls and a small front yard where the grass had grown wild. The windows were boarded up with precariously nailed planks, and the front door had a heavy chain with a massive padlock. "This is it," Richard said, checking the address on the letter one more time. Luna got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house as if she were seeing a ghost. Her legs trembled slightly, and Richard realized she was fighting a battle between fear and emotion. "Can you picture your mum here?" he asked gently. "I can't remember her," Luna admitted, her voice choked. "Sometimes I think I dream of a woman singing me to sleep, but I never know if it's real or if I made it up." Richard felt a pang of guilt, thinking of Carmen cleaning his offices in the middle of the night, probably coming home exhausted to care for a small child before finding out she was sick. They walked around the house until they found a back window where the boards were loose. Carefully, Richard managed to pry them open enough for them to slip inside. The interior was dusty and covered in cobwebs, but it still preserved its original structure. The small living room had furniture covered in old sheets. In the kitchen, dishes were still stacked in the drying rack, as if Carmen had just stepped out for a quick walk and would be back any minute. The smell of a closed-up house mingled with something more, subtle, perhaps old perfume or soap. "It's like time stopped," Luna murmured, gently touching the kitchen table. Richard watched her move through the house, her gestures careful and respectful, as if she were on sacred ground. There was something in the way she touched the objects that suggested an instinctive connection to the place, as if a part of her recognized this home. "The attic," Richard remembered, looking up. "Your mother mentioned an attic." They found a small ladder in the hallway leading to a narrow door in the ceiling. Richard went up first, pushing open the door, which groaned in protest. The smell of mildew was stronger up there, mixed with old wood and years of accumulated dust. The attic was small and low-ceilinged, lit only by the faint light coming through a small round window in the wall. Cardboard boxes were stacked against the walls, some marked with a shaky script that Richard recognized as the same handwriting from the letter. "Luna," he called softly. "Come see this." The girl climbed the ladder slowly, each step creaking under her light weight. When she reached the attic, her eyes widened at the number of boxes stored there. She kept all. "This?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. Richard moved toward the boxes, looking for a blue one. In the back of the attic, partially hidden behind a wooden beam as described in the letter, he found a shoebox painted light blue, with small hand-drawn flowers on the sides. "I think this is it," he said, picking up the box carefully. Luna approached slowly, her hands trembling as Richard handed her the box. For a moment, she just held it, feeling the weight of what might contain her entire personal history. Then, with infinite care, she lifted the lid. What they saw inside would change everything. The first thing Luna saw was a small, faded photograph of a young woman holding a baby. The picture was yellowed at the edges, but the woman's radiant smile still shone through time. Luna picked up the photo with trembling fingers, bringing it closer to her face to get a better look. "That's her," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That's my mum." Richard leaned over the girl's shoulder to see the photograph. Carmen looked even younger in the picture than he remembered, maybe in her early 20s with her dark hair loose. On her shoulders and eyes that radiated pure happiness as she held the baby to her chest. The love in her expression was undeniable. "You were a tiny baby," Richard observed gently. Luna turned the photograph over and found a note in the familiar handwriting. "Luna, my treasure, 3 months old. First smile yesterday. You are the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to me." Tears began to stream down Luna's face without her realizing it. For years she had wondered if she had truly been wanted, if her existence had brought joy to anyone. The answer was right, there, written with love in her mother's shaky script. Inside the box were more scattered photographs, documenting moments of Luna's childhood she couldn't remember. One showed her taking her first wobbly steps in the small backyard. Another showed her sleeping in Carmen's lap, both bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. A third showed Luna, maybe 2 years old, playing with colorful blocks while Carmen smiled in the background. "She took pictures of everything," Luna murmured, running her fingers over the images as if she could touch the memories. Under the photographs were tiny, carefully folded clothes. A light, blue baby blanket, still soft despite the years. Tiny baby shoes that had never been worn, the store tag still attached. A little yellow dress with hand-stitched embroidery, each stitch a testament to hours of dedicated work. Richard watched as Luna held each piece of clothing to her chest, inhaling deeply as if she could capture some trace of her mother's scent. The scene was both touching and devastating. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was a brown teddy bear. It was worn and some of its seams were visible, clearly well-loved and hugged. One of its ears was partially detached and its nose was faded with time. "Mr. Chocolate," Luna read aloud from the small tag sewn onto the bear's paw. She frowned, concentrating. I think I remember him." "You do?" Richard asked, surprised. "I sometimes dream about a brown bear. I thought I was making it up, but—" Luna hugged the toy to her chest. "He smells like home." like safety. Richard felt a lump in his throat as he watched the girl's immediate connection to the object. It was as if a part of her memory was awakening through the familiar touch and smell. There was also a small floral-covered diary, its yellowed pages filled with the familiar handwriting. Richard carefully opened it to the first page and read silently, "Today, Luna was born. I have no words to describe what I feel. It's like my heart has grown 3 sizes. She is perfect, tiny but perfect. I promised her I would be the best mother I could be." The following pages documented Luna's first months of life in meticulous detail. Carmen had noted every milestone, the first smile, the first time Luna held an object, her first sounds that could be considered attempts at speech. "She wrote about you every day," Richard said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Luna couldn't answer. She was absorbed in examining a sealed envelope she had found at the bottom of the box. Her name was written on the front in neat letters, "For Luna when she's older." "Can I?" She looked at Richard uncertainly. "Could you read this for me?" Richard took the envelope carefully and opened it slowly. Inside were several folded sheets, covered in the same familiar handwriting, but neater, as if Carmen had taken special care to write each word. "My dearest Luna," he began to read aloud, "if you're reading this, it means you've found our box of treasures. I wanted to leave these letters for you so you could understand our story, so you would know that every day I spent away from you was an agony." Richard paused, feeling the weight of the words he was about to share. "Keep going," Luna whispered. "When you were little, I worked very hard to support us. I cleaned offices in the middle of the night, came home and took care of you during the day, then went back to work. I was exhausted, but I was happy because we had each other." Luna leaned against the attic wall, hugging the teddy bear tightly. "Then I found out I was sick. The doctors said I needed treatment right away, but I didn't have the money to pay for it. The state offered free treatment, but only if I went to a hospital in another city, far away from you. I had to choose between dying by your side or trying to live far away from you." Richard's voice cracked for a moment. He imagined Carmen making that impossible decision, weighing her own life against her daughter's well-being. "I tried to find family to take care of you, but we didn't have anyone. I looked for families who could adopt you, but the process was too long. You were so little, only 3 years old. In the end, the only option I had left was—" Richard stopped reading abruptly, his face turning pale. "What is it?" Luna asked, noticing the change in his expression. She tried to find me." The words came out as a whisper. "Carmen tried to contact me." Richard continued reading silently, the words of the letter, confirming his worst fears. Carmen had remembered him as the only boss who had been kind to her. She had tried to locate him through the building where she worked, but he had already moved to another office. She left messages that never reached him. She wrote letters that were lost. "She thought I could help you," Richard murmured, more to himself than to Luna. "Help how?" the girl asked, sensing there was something important he wasn't sharing. Richard looked at Luna, seeing in her eyes the same confident expression Carmen had when she asked for permission to clean the offices, the same quiet dignity, the same inner strength despite the difficult circumstances. In that moment, he realized his life had intersected with this family's far more deeply than he had ever imagined, and that maybe, just maybe, there was still time to fix at least some of what had gone wrong. But before he could explain anything to Luna, a noise from downstairs made them both freeze. Heavy footsteps echoed through the empty house, followed by male voices discussing something in low tones. Someone else had entered the abandoned house. Richard put a finger to his lips, signaling for Luna to be quiet. The footsteps downstairs continued, accompanied by male voices arguing in low tones. A loud creak echoed through the house as someone opened a door that clearly hadn't been used in years. "You sure she lived here?" a gruff voice asked. "The neighbor said so, Carmen something. Died a long time ago, but she might have left something valuable." Richard felt his blood run cold. They were men looking for Carmen, or rather for anything she might have left behind. Luna clutched the teddy bear to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay very still," Richard whispered in her ear. "Don't make a sound." The footsteps moved through the house, accompanied by the sound of furniture being overturned and drawers being yanked open. They were clearly not concerned with preserving Carmen's memory. "There's nothing but junk in here," one of the voices complained. "Just old broken furniture. Look harder. The woman worked her whole life. She must have stashed some cash somewhere." Richard clenched his fists, enraged by the invasion of this sacred space. This house held Luna's most precious memories, and these men were treating it as a simple opportunity for easy profit. Luna trembled. As they heard footsteps on the main staircase, one of the voices was closer now. "What about that attic up there? See if there's anything in it." Richard's heart pounded. The attic ladder creaked under the weight of someone climbing. They were trapped up there with no escape route, surrounded by strangers with clearly bad intentions. A man's head appeared through the attic opening. He was a middle-aged guy with a scruffy beard and dirty clothes. His eyes scanned the dusty space until they landed on Richard, and Luna huddled in the darkest corner. "Whoa!" he yelled to his companions. "We've got company up here." The man climbed all the way into the attic, followed by another, younger and thinner man. They both sized up Richard with curiosity, clearly surprised to find a well-dressed man in a place like this. "What are you two doing here?" the first man asked, his tone threatening. Richard stood up slowly, instinctively positioning himself in front of Luna in a protective gesture. "We could ask you the same question. This house doesn't belong to you." The younger man laughed contemptuously. "And it belongs to you? 'Cause from what we hear, the owner died years ago and left no heirs." "Yes, she did," Richard said firmly, gesturing toward Luna. "This is Carmen Diaz's daughter." The two men looked at Luna with renewed interest. She was still holding the open blue box, the photographs and letters scattered around her like evidence of an interrupted life. "The little daughter," the older man muttered, a nasty smile spreading across his face. "Interesting. Very interesting." "What do you want?" Richard asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Same thing you do, I imagine. Carmen must have stashed something valuable here. Money, jewelry, who knows. The woman worked her whole life." "There's nothing of value here," Richard lied. "Just personal items with no importance." The younger man moved closer to the blue box, eyeing the photographs. "Personal items can have sentimental value, and sometimes sentimental value is worth money." Luna instinctively pulled the box closer, her eyes shining with tears of anger and fear. These were the only traces left of her mother, the only proof she had ever been loved. She wouldn't let anyone take them. "These things are mine," she said, her voice small but firm. "My mom left them for me. Is that so?" The older man crouched down to her level, his breath smelling of cigarettes and booze. "And what else did your mummy leave for you, little girl?" Richard took a step forward, his patience wearing thin. "That's enough. Get out of here now, or I'm calling the authorities." The two men exchanged a look and laughed. "The authorities?" The younger one scoffed. "And how are you going to do that, boss? Your cell phone's got no service up here in the attic." Richard realized they were in a delicate situation. The men clearly had no intention of leaving without something of value, and Luna was becoming increasingly distressed. It was then that Luna, still exploring the contents of the box, found something that had gone unnoticed at first glance. At the very bottom, under the letters and photographs, was a small golden key tied with a faded red ribbon. "What's this?" she asked, showing the key to Richard. The eyes of the two intruders lit up with interest when they saw the object. "A key," the older one muttered. "Now we're talking." "Key to what, little girl?" Luna looked at Richard, confused. He gently took the key, examining it in the faint light from the small attic window. It was an old key, clearly made for something specific and important. "Must open something in the house," the younger man said, starting to look around the attic with renewed attention. "Look for a chest, a safe, anything that needs a key." Richard was the one who noticed it first. In the most hidden corner of the attic, behind a stack of old boxes, was something covered by a dusty cloth. He approached and pulled the fabric away, revealing a small antique safe made of dark metal. "Bingo!" the older man exclaimed, rubbing his hands together in Satisfaction. Richard felt Luna move closer to him, still clutching the teddy bear like a protective talisman. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control. "The key," the man demanded, holding his grimy hand out to Richard. "No." The refusal was firm and clear. "Whatever is in that safe belongs to Luna. It's her inheritance from her mother." The tension in the attic thickened. The two men exchanged a meaningful glance, and Richard knew the situation was about to become much more dangerous. But before anyone could make a move, Luna stepped forward. Her voice, though still childish, carried a surprising determination. "That safe was my mum's. Whatever is inside, she saved for me. You have no right to anything here." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of city traffic. The two men weighed the situation, clearly deciding on their next move. Richard braced himself to protect Luna at all costs, and then the sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, growing steadily closer to Acacia Avenue. The sound of sirens made the two men look at each other nervously. The younger one scrambled to the small attic window and peered through the dusty glass. "There's a squad car on the street," he whispered, panic evident in his voice. "Two of them." "Shit," the older one cursed, already heading for the exit. "Someone must have called the cops when they saw us breaking in." Richard held Luna closer, shielding her as the men scrambled down the attic ladder. The sound of them running through the house echoed for a few seconds, followed by the front door slamming shut. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Luna trembled in Richard's arms, still clutching the teddy bear to her chest. The sirens faded until they disappeared completely, indicating the squad cars had moved on. "They're gone," Richard whispered, relief washing over his tense body. Luna nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the antique safe now exposed in the corner of the attic. The golden key was still in Richard's hand, gleaming faintly in the dim light. Can I open it now?" she asked, her voice still shaky from the scare. Richard looked at the girl and saw a mixture of fear and determination. After everything she had been through, she deserved to know all the secrets her mother had kept for her. "Of course," he said, handing her the key. "It's yours by right." Luna approached the safe with careful steps, as if approaching something sacred. Her small hands trembled as she inserted the key into the old lock. The metal groaned in protest, but after a few tries they heard the familiar click of a lock disengaging. Inside the safe were more letters, these tied with a faded blue ribbon. Under the letters, Luna found a thick envelope that rattled when she shook it. When she opened it, she discovered it was full of money, not a huge amount, but several. Neatly stacked and organized bills. "She saved this for you," Richard observed, touched by Carmen's dedication, even in her difficult circumstances. But what caught their attention most was a small, leather-bound notebook, different from the diary they had found in the blue box. This one seemed more formal, with notes organized into columns and specific dates. Luna handed the notebook to Richard. "Can you read it for me?" Richard opened the notebook and immediately recognized it as a meticulous record Carmen had kept of her life, and especially of Luna. The first pages documented her expenses for the baby, every dollar saved and spent carefully noted. Diapers, 12 bong-zeros, formula, £8.50, doctor's visit, 25 bong-zeros. Richard read aloud. "She wrote down everything she spent on you." As he turned the pages, the notes became more personal. Carmen wrote about her fears as a single mother, about the hardship of working through the night and caring for a small child during the day, but also about the joy Luna brought to her life. Day 15. Luna said "Mama" today. My heart almost exploded with happiness, worth every sleepless night. Day 23. Luna has a fever, took her to the public hospital. The doctor said it's just a cold, but I was terrified all day. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to her. The entries continued chronologically, but as time went on, the tone began to shift. Carmen started writing about aches and pains, about a fatigue that wouldn't go away even after sleeping. Day 10 of year 3. Went to the doctor. He said I need tests. I'm scared, but I can't get sick. Luna needs me. Richard paused, feeling the weight of what he was about to read. Luna remained silent, sensing that something important was being revealed. Day 20. The tests confirmed it. It's cancer, advanced stage. The doctor said I need to start treatment immediately, but it's in another city. How can I leave my daughter? Richard's voice faltered. He imagined Carmen receiving that devastating news alone, with no one to support her but a 3-year-old child who couldn't even understand what was happening. The following pages documented Carmen's desperate attempts to find a solution. She had sought out distant relatives who didn't want to take responsibility for Luna. She tried to find families for adoption, but the processes were long and bureaucratic. Time was running out. Day 5. I remembered Mr. Richard from the office where I work. He was always kind to me, unlike the others. Maybe he could help Luna when I'm gone. I'm going to try to find him. Richard's heart stopped for a moment. There it was, the confirmation that Carmen had tried to find him, that she had thought of him as a potential savior for her daughter. Day 8. I went to the building to look for Mr. Richard, but he doesn't work there anymore. The security guard said he moved offices but didn't know where. I left a message with my phone number, but he never called. Day 12. I've tried other offices, but no one knows a Richard Harrison. It's like he vanished. The treatment has to start next week. I'm running out of options. Richard felt an overwhelming guilt wash over him. While Carmen was desperately trying to find him, he had been too busy building his financial empire to even know someone needed him. Keep going, Luna whispered, sensing there was more. The last entries were the most painful. Carmen described how she had left Luna at a temporary care facility, promising to come back for her after the treatment. But the treatment hadn't worked as hoped. Last entry, the doctor said there's nothing more they can do. I have a few weeks, maybe months. Luna is safe at the facility, but I know it's no place for her to grow up. I've written letters explaining everything, saved them in a special box. Maybe one day, when she's older, she'll understand that I left her out of love, not abandonment. Richard closed the notebook, unable to read anymore. Luna was crying silently, finally understanding the extent of the sacrifice her mother had made. She died trying to protect me, Luna whispered. And trying to find me, Richard added, his voice hoarse with emotion. If I had been easier to find, maybe... Maybe what? Luna asked, looking at him with curiosity. Richard hesitated. How could he explain to a 7-year-old girl that he could have changed the course of their lives if he had been less selfish, less focused on himself? But before he could answer, he heard footsteps in the house again. This time, however, they were different, lighter, more careful. A woman's voice called, "From downstairs. Hello, is anyone here?" I saw the door was open and got worried. This was Carmen's house. Richard and Luna looked at each other. Someone who knew Carmen had arrived, and maybe she would bring even more answers about the past that was slowly being unveiled. "We're up here," Richard called out in response to the female voice echoing from the ground floor. The footsteps approached the stairs, and soon the head of a grey-haired woman with kind eyes appeared. She must have been in her 60s, wearing a floral apron, and a worried expression that turned to surprise when she saw Richard and Luna in the attic. "My goodness," she murmured, climbing all the way into the attic. "Are you relatives of Carmen's?" "I'm her daughter," Luna said shyly, still clutching the teddy bear to her chest. The woman's eyes instantly filled with tears. "Luna? My dear, are you little Luna?" She knelt down to the girl's level, her hands trembling with emotion. "I'm Mrs. Peterson. I used to live next door. I knew you when you were just a baby." Luna looked at the woman with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. So many people had passed through her life without leaving a positive mark that she had learned to be cautious. "You knew my mum?" Luna asked. "I knew and loved that girl as if she were my own daughter," Mrs. Peterson replied, wiping her tears with her apron. "Carmen was a special soul, hard-working, devoted to you. When she got sick..." The woman's voice broke. Richard watched the interaction between Luna and Mrs. Peterson, realizing he had finally found someone who could fill in the gaps in Carmen's story. "I helped Carmen in her last few months," Mrs. Peterson continued, "when she had to. Go to doctor's appointments, I would watch Luna. When she worked late at night, I'd keep an ear out in case the little one needed anything." "Why did she never tell me about you?" Luna asked. Mrs. Peterson sighed deeply. Because Carmen was proud. She didn't like to be seen as someone who needed help. But in the last few days before she left for treatment, she came to me, desperate. The woman looked around the attic, noticing the open boxes and scattered items. I see you've found her treasures. Carmen told me where she had hidden everything, just in case something happened. What else do you know about those last days? Richard asked, feeling he was about to discover something crucial. Mrs. Peterson sat on an old box, her hands clasped in her lap. Carmen was desperate to find someone who could take care of Luna. She told me about a man, a boss who had been kind to her. Richard Harrison, Richard completed, feeling his stomach clench. That's him. Mrs. Peterson looked at him with renewed interest. Are you him? The man Carmen was looking for? I am, Richard admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. My goodness. Mrs. Peterson studied him carefully. Carmen spent weeks trying to find you. She said you were different from her other bosses, that you treated your employees with respect. She thought maybe you could help Luna, or at least point her toward a good family to care for her. Richard felt as if he'd been stabbed. I never knew. If I had known. I tried to convince her to let me take care of Luna, Mrs. Peterson continued. But Carmen said I was already too old, and it wouldn't be fair to me. She wanted someone younger, someone who could give her daughter opportunities. Luna listened in silence, absorbing every word about a mother who had fought to the very end to ensure her well-being. What happened when she couldn't find me? Richard asked. Mrs. Peterson looked down. She had to leave Luna at a temporary care facility. She promised she'd be back soon, that it was just until she finished her treatment, but her condition was already very advanced. The woman paused, clearly fighting her emotions. Carmen called me a few times from the hospital. She always asked about Luna if I had managed to visit her at the facility. But visits were limited and I wasn't a relative. Carmen was desperate because she knew she was getting worse. And then, Luna whispered, in our last conversation, Carmen told me she had left letters and items stored here in the house. She asked me if anything happened to try to find Luna when she was older and tell her the truth. She said she had written everything down, but that the girl might need someone to explain. Mrs. Peterson stood up and walked to one of the boxes, pulling out a yellowed envelope that had remained hidden. She gave me this to give to you, Luna. She said it was only to be opened when you could understand everything. Luna took the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written on the front in her mother's familiar handwriting, but this time the letters were firmer, as if Carmen had gathered all her strength to write this final message. Do you want me to read it? Richard offered gently. Luna nodded, handing him the envelope. Richard opened it carefully and unfolded the sheets inside. His expression changed dramatically as he read the first few lines silently. What does it say? Luna asked, noticing the change in his face. Richard took a deep breath before starting to read aloud. My dearest Luna, if Mrs. Peterson is giving you this letter, it means I wasn't able to come back to you as I promised. I don't have much time to write, so I'll get straight to what's most important. He paused, realizing that what he was about to read would change everything. There is something about your birth that I never had the courage to tell you. Something that could change your life if the right person reads this letter. Luna leaned forward, anxious. Your father didn't die like I always said. He's alive and he's a good man. He never knew about you because I never had the courage to tell him. At the time, he was building his career and I was just a cleaning lady. I thought it would be better to raise you alone than to complicate his life. The silence in the attic was absolute. Richard continued reading, but his voice began to tremble. Your father's name is Richard Harrison. He works in real estate and was always kind to me. In my last days, I tried to find him to tell him about you, but I couldn't. If fate ever brings you two together, know that he is a good man and that he deserves to know he has a wonderful daughter. The letter slipped from Richard's hands. Luna stared at him with wide eyes, trying to process what she had just discovered. You, she whispered, you're my father. Mrs. Peterson covered her mouth with her hands, clearly shocked by the revelation. Richard looked at Luna, really looked at her for the first time. The dark eyes, the shape of her face, certain expressions he had noticed. but couldn't place. Now it all made sense. I didn't know, he stammered. Carmen never told me. If I had known. But Luna wasn't listening to his explanations. She had just discovered that the man who had lied to her about the letter, who had initially refused to help her, who had taken hours to come back and find her, was her own father, and that he had been within her mother's reach the whole time. But Carmen never had the courage to tell the truth that could have saved them both. The silence that settled over the attic was as heavy as lead. Luna clutched the teddy bear so tightly her knuckles were white, her eyes fixed on Richard as if seeing a stranger for the first time. "You're my father," she repeated, but this time it wasn't a question. It was an accusation laced with pain. "And you lied to me when I asked you to read the letter." Richard felt every word like a physical blow. "Luna, I didn't know. If I had known—" "You knew it was important," she burst out, her small voice trembling with anger and hurt. "I told you it was about me, that I never knew who my family was. And you lied." Tears began to stream down Luna's face, but they weren't tears of joy at finding her father. They were tears of betrayal, of confirmed abandonment, of a wound that had just been torn open even wider. "For years I imagined who my parents were," she continued, sobbing. "I made up stories in my head about a father who was looking for me, who missed me. But you were here the whole time. And when we finally met, you rejected me." Mrs. Peterson placed a gentle hand on Luna's shoulder. "Honey, maybe he really didn't know—" "He could have known," Luna shouted. "If my mom hadn't died alone trying to find him, if he had been easier to find, if he had cared about the people who cleaned his offices." Each word was a painful truth Richard couldn't deny. He had lived in a bubble of privilege, focused only on his own goals, blind to the suffering of the people around him. "You're right," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I failed you before I even knew you existed. I failed your mother when she needed me. I failed as a human being." Luna stopped crying abruptly, surprised by the direct admission. "But now I know," Richard continued, kneeling on the dusty floor to be at her level, "and I want to make everything right from now on, if you'll give me a chance." "Why?" Luna asked, her voice still suspicious. "Because now you know I'm your daughter? Where were you when I was sleeping on the street? Where were you when I was eating scraps people threw away? Where were you when I cried because I had no one?" Each question was a knife in Richard's heart. He pictured a tiny Luna, cold, hungry and afraid, while he was dining in expensive restaurants and sleeping in his 1,000-thread-count sheets. "I was being selfish," he answered honestly. "I was building a financial empire but failing as a person. I have no excuse for it." Mrs. Peterson watched the scene with tears in her eyes, remembering the conversations she'd had with Carmen about the man she respected so much. "Luna," she said gently, "your mother spoke about your father with such warmth. She said he was different, that he treated everyone with respect. Maybe she saw something in him that's still there." Luna looked at Mrs. Peterson, then at Richard. "But he lied to me." "Out of fear," the wise woman observed. "Sometimes people lie out of fear, not malice. Maybe he was afraid of what the letter might reveal." Richard nodded slowly. "When I read the letter and saw your mother's name, I was terrified. I remembered her, but I couldn't understand why she would be looking for me. When you said the letter was about you, I thought maybe, but I didn't have the courage to face the possibility." Luna was silent for a long time, processing everything. She watched Richard carefully, searching for signs of sincerity in his expression. "If you really are my father," she said finally, "why did it take you so long to find me today? Why didn't you come back right away?" Richard took a deep breath. "Because I'm a coward. I spent hours in my office drinking and trying to convince myself it wasn't my responsibility. It was only when I confirmed your mother was dead that I realized what I had lost." Richard's brutal honesty surprised Luna. She had expected excuses or justifications, but he was admitting his flaws without trying to defend himself. "So now what?" she asked. "What's going to happen to me?" "Now you're coming home with me," Richard said without hesitation. "You're my daughter. You should have been with me all along." "I don't know you," Luna protested. "You might be rich, but that doesn't make you a father." You're right, Richard agreed. I don't know how to be a father. I never learned. But I want to learn. With you. Mrs. Peterson came over and knelt beside them. Luna, your mother made me promise one thing before she left. She said, if Richard ever finds out about Luna, tell him I always believed he would be a good father. Not because of the money, but because of his heart. Luna looked at the older woman, then at Richard. For the first time since learning the truth, her expression softened slightly. My mum really said that? She did. And she also said that if you two ever found each other, it would be a gift from fate for both of you. She thought you needed a father, and that he needed to learn to love something more than his work. Richard felt his eyes well up, his eyes, with tears. Carmen saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. Luna placed the teddy bear back in the blue box and closed the lid carefully. Then she looked directly into Richard's eyes. If I go with you, it won't be because you have money. It will be because I want to know the man my mother respected, but you're going to have to prove you deserve to be my father. How? Richard asked, ready for any challenge. By being honest with me, always, no matter how much the truth hurts. Richard held out his hand to her. I promise. Luna hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand. It was a formal handshake, not a hug, but it was a start. 2 years later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Luna was sitting in the library of Richard's house, reading a book about astronomy. Now 9, she had developed a passion for stars and planets that Richard nurtured by taking her to planetariums and buying her books on the subject. The house had changed completely since Luna's arrival. The cold walls now displayed her drawings and photographs. The oppressive silence had been replaced by laughter, conversation, and sometimes arguments, because Luna had inherited Carmen's strong personality and didn't hesitate to confront Richard when she disagreed with him. Dad, she called, using the title that had taken her months to start using naturally. Are you taking me to visit Mum's grave today? Richard appeared at the library door, smiling. Of course. Is Mrs. Peterson coming with us? She said yes, and she wants to bring flowers from her garden. Mrs. Peterson had become an essential part of their lives, a bridge between the past and the present, a loving grandmother Luna had never had. Richard had insisted she move into a nearby house, where she could be present without feeling like an intruder. During their visit to the cemetery, Luna placed fresh flowers on Carmen's grave and sat on the grass beside it. Mum, she whispered, I found Dad. You were right about him. It took him a little while to learn, but he's a good dad now, and I know you're proud of both of us. Richard knelt beside his daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Thank you, Carmen, he murmured, for giving me the chance to be a father, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, for raising such an incredible daughter. The gentle wind rustled the flowers on the grave as if Carmen were answering. That night, Richard tucked Luna into bed, a ritual that had become sacred for both of them. She still slept with Mr. Chocolate the teddy bear, now clean and with a few mended seams. Dad, she said before falling asleep, do you know the difference between you and Mom? What's that? She loved me from day one. But you're learning to love me every day, and maybe that's even more special. Richard kissed Luna's forehead, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He had learned that true love wasn't something you possessed, but something you built day by day with patience, honesty, and dedication. Outside, the stars shone brightly over New York City, and Richard knew that Carmen was at peace, knowing her daughter had finally found her place in the world, not by chance but by a greater force that had brought together two souls who needed each other to become whole.